Bienvenidos to Chapter 18 with Miss Hook. We're going to look at ecology today. So what is ecology? It's the study of the interactions between organisms and their environments. So what do we mean by their environments? Let's look at the two parts that make up the environment. First is the abiotic component. So remember, that's everything that's non-living. So that's the chemical, physical factors, amount of sunlight, rainfall, nutrients, etc. Whereas the biotic component is all of the living factors. We can take ecology and divide it into more comprehensive, more overarching levels. So we can start small with organismal, get a little bit bigger with population, community, and then whole ecosystem. Look at that. That's a South African secretary bird. I took that picture. So organismal biology is concerned with individual organisms, what kind of adaptations they have to meet the challenges of their abiotic environment. So for example, whales would be a great one to look at how they're able to live in water, how they can breathe, how they can dive deeply, what they have for oxygen stores, what they feed on, what products they produce, how they work with the temperature changes in the jet streams, for example. Next, population ecology. So remember, a population is the same species, it's a group of the same species living together in the same area. So usually with population ecology, you're looking at population density, how thick they are, and their population growth or decline. And then community ecology. So the community is all the different species here, how different species interact together. So there you could look at like trees, like herbivores and the plants that they eat, trees and their products and their dispersal between them and other species, predator-prey interactions between species. And then the highest level is ecosystem ecology. So that's looking at abiotic factors with the different species. So there usually you're looking at energy flow and cycling of the chemicals. And we'll look at that more. So later we'll look at how fertilizers and adding extra nutrients into an ecosystem can change the whole balance. And then the global ecosystem is the biosphere. That's all of Earth. So when we look at Earth as a whole, we see specific patterns. Lots of that has to do with latitude, how far north or south places are. You'll see what are called biomes, like grasslands, temperate forests, rainforests. Those are different climates dependent on rainfall, temperature, etc. And they have oftentimes similar functions. So habitats, those are the environments in which organisms live. So that's the biotic and abiotic factors where organisms live. These are some of the elephants that I studied in South Africa when I looked at elephant behavior for my master's. And ecology is highly linked to evolution. We look at how these adaptations have occurred to allow different organisms to live in their niches, the spaces that they live. For example, this is the dassy, or the rock hyrax. By looking at it, you probably wouldn't be able to guess its closest relatives. Its closest relatives are the elephant and manatees. So there, they have changed severely between the two different groups based on the environment and those that they're habitating. These guys live in the rocks mostly. So what kind of adaptations help individuals be more fit, send off more offspring, be successful in their environment? Well, there are three types of changes that can occur: physiological, anatomical, and behavioral. So physiology is function. So that's changes in function. The elephants have trunks that act as like hands for us. They can pick things up, they smell them, they can put them into their mouth, which has their vomeronasal organ, where they can tell what pheromones are present. So males will touch female urine and put it up there to check it out. Anatomical, changes in anatomy. This is an African elephant. And other than the fact that I told you that the elephants that I looked at were in Africa, a way that you'd be able to tell that is the African elephants have a much larger ear. Some say it's shaped like Africa. This is an anatomical adaptation. Bigger ears, like why would that be helpful? Well, they help funnel sound. Elephants can hear a wide range of sound, including low infrasonic sounds that we can't hear. They can rumble really low. But also, they have tons of blood vessels in here that's highly vascularized. So when they're really hot, they send lots of blood to their ears and they flap their ears. That helps cool off the blood, bring down their body temperature. And then behavioral. So this elephant is coated in mud. That's another way to help protect itself from the sun and cool down. It went mudding, it splashed it over its body. Next, we're going to look at population growth models. There are two models, and they're very important for understanding population growth and how things function in their ecosystem. You've got what's called exponential growth and logistic. So we're going to look at over time how the population density, how many individuals there are, changes. So the exponential growth model, that's when you have ideal, unregulated conditions, so you can keep growing really well. There's nothing to stop it from continuing to grow. So an example of that would be making bacteria cells colonize in a flask. So there you've got lots and lots of nutrients, and you see the plotted points here. I don't know why that's like that. And each time you're growing exponentially. So it's 2 to the 0, to the 1, to the 2. So these exponents are getting bigger and bigger. So that's each time the cells divide. So one cell divides, you got 2. Each of those divide to 4. Each of those divide to 8. So that's what it's doing there. And that can work for a bit, but eventually there will be some environmental factor that limits its growth. That's called the limiting factor. Most of the time, that's water. Sometimes it's nutrients. So you can see it's like a bucket here, and each of these portions is made up of a different factor that the population needs for growth. So light, heat, mechanical support, organic matter, phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, other nutrients, water, air. So whatever the lowest one is here, that means that there's the least amount of potassium. So you can only grow your population to a level that is supported by this much potassium. It doesn't matter how much of everything else you have, but once one limiting factor is reached, your population can't grow. So that's why we have more of a logistic growth model. So there it starts out as kind of exponential, but then we slow down. So for example, with seals, that would probably be based on the amount of space that they have, the amount of territory. So what is carrying capacity? That's the number of individuals that that population can maintain with no net increase or decrease. So if we look back at the logistic growth model, we see that it starts to flatten out. That line right there is the carrying capacity. You know, the population can fluctuate above and below, but it remains relatively stable. So for example, like deer, you've got your population in the winter. There, they've already mated, females are pregnant, and then in the spring we start increasing that population. Females give birth, so the population increases. But then over the year, you'll have some not able to get enough food, they can get sick, have accidents, can be really cold. Then you've got like they hunt them, and then they have predators eat them until they get back right to their carrying capacity. We allow hunting because otherwise the deer populations would be too high and would be unhealthy. So it's actually an important thing to do, and they're very good conservationists for the most part. But if we had more large predators like wolves, it wouldn't be as necessary. We'd be able to keep deer at a healthy carrying capacity much more easily. Now let's talk about the human population. So we've been growing exponentially. We haven't, as far as this graph is concerned, hit our carrying capacity yet. However, many scientists believe we've already surpassed it. We're using resources at an unsustainable rate. To maintain this too large population. So our birth rate minus our death rate determines our growth. So the more births we have compared to the deaths, our population is growing. So in more advanced countries, you'll see a decreased birth rate so that they're either not growing or they're decreasing in population size. An important factor there is the education of women. When women are given the ability to family plan and are educated, populations decrease, family size decreases, and we become more sustainable. Now let's talk a little bit about climate change. There isn't even a debate on climate change in any other countries really other than ours. It's widely accepted. Scientists agree 97% global warming is occurring, and it's occurring because of humans. And you might say, well, what is global warming? It was really cold last winter, so I don't have to worry about it. Well, it's not just warming everywhere all at once. The average temperatures are increasing, but that leads to these more extreme winters and summers, these increasing droughts. That some places are actually decreasing in temperature. This has very wide, scary effects for our world. So trying to reduce the amount of carbon emissions that we have is really important. So the polar bear, for example, they trek along the ice and they swim with their offspring to the mainland. And as that ice gets smaller, they have to swim further and further. So we're seeing a decrease in polar bear survivability. Precipitation patterns have also changed. Some areas have been in droughts, like California and parts of Europe, and this is another UK, Bosnia have all seen flooding. So we're seeing these differences in rain patterns. The evidence that states that human enterprises are responsible for the changes that are occurring, that they're making them far worse, is overwhelming. It's very important when you look at research on this to look at who pays for the research, if it's been published in a peer journal, and what the authors have to say. There are a couple of journals from like the 70s that published global cooling hypotheses, and both of those authors really regret doing that now because they didn't know and they found more information and they agree with global warming now, but didn't then. So why is the Earth warming? What is this happening? Why do we have to worry about our carbon emissions? We have to worry about that because our atmosphere has these what are called greenhouse gases. So it acts like a greenhouse and it traps the heat in. So instead of reflecting out of our atmosphere, it reflects back in. So that would be like carbon dioxide, water, and methane, CH4. They absorb the heat, they allow it to reflect back. So where are we seeing the biggest changes? We're seeing it at our poles, Northern Hemisphere and Antarctica. And it's completely undebatable that human activities have increased greenhouse gases. The Industrial Revolution allowed us to streamline. It also allows us to produce a lot of waste. So how did we get this greater accumulation? Well, normally, photosynthesis taking up carbon dioxide and cellular respiration releasing it are pretty equal.